said, my name is Johana Bhuiyan. I'm a technology reporter with the Los Angeles Times. And I've been covering the future of transportation for about 5 or so years. Before that was a beat, which is kind of nice. And so I'm excited about the panel that we're about to have. We're going to be talking about how shifting notions of car ownership is affecting the mobility landscape, pretty much what you guys all probably talk about constantly. So I'm excited about the panel that we have. To my left, I have Haddad, he's the CEO of Turo. Luke Schneider, the CEO of Silvercar. Megan Stooke, she is the CMO and the Chief Growth Officer of Maven. And Simon Broesamle, he's the Chief Customer Officer of BMW ReachNow. So before we start, I want to sort of unpack the premise of this panel, which is that car ownership is going away. And we talked a little bit backstage about how we don't really, this type of a conversation can sort of lead to extremes, which is, car ownership is not going away, where some people are saying that it absolutely will be, gone in the next 5 years. So I want to kind of avoid that. What I want to talk about is, from your vantage points, are you seeing trends today that show that the rate of car ownership is decreasing at a level that maybe in 10 or more years, we will see a landscape where people are relying on mobility services either more than they are today or, primarily?
Should I jump in?
Sure.
So we recently did a survey with our community of users, and we haven't shared this data publicly yet, but I want to give you a bit of a sneak peek.
I love that. Let's break some news.
So we, just to give people here in the audience background, Turo is the leading peer-to-peer car sharing company. So we both have on our marketplace people who share their cars. Those are obviously by definition car owners, since they are sharing their personal vehicle. But then on the other part of the marketplace, we have travelers who are booking these cars for local mobility or for traditional travel use cases. And so we interviewed, did a lot of research with the kind of the guest side of the marketplace. And as it turns out, we have almost 50% of our guests on the Turo marketplace that are have decided to no longer own cars over the last 3 years. So we are seeing, to answer your question, we are seeing, in particular in the urban areas, in particular with younger audiences, a downsizing of car ownership. Now, to project that out, to say, in 10 years there will be literally 0 cars purchased by, no one across the country, I think is a bit absurd.
Sure.
But definitely, I think there are, with the abundance of new mobility options that are available for consumers, whether it's, folks like all the companies in this panel and other, other entrepreneurs and other big companies that are building their own mobility solutions. I think as those solutions become more available and more convenient to use, I think you will continue to see that phenomenon.
Right. So that's what I was going to ask. You said that you interviewed your users,
yes,
and 50% said that they were no longer, or they got rid of their cars. Is that what you so? But was that because of Turo as a singular solution, or was it?
No. I think the future. Yeah, I think. I mean, the mobile phone is really replacing the personal vehicle. We would traditionally, work with our personal vehicle and use our personal vehicle to drive the biggest number of miles that we'd ever drive, and there was some supplement with traditional rental car or taxis. I think now, the personal vehicle for those audiences that I was talking about is replaced by their phone, and they have, Uber, they have Lyft, they have Maven, they have Silvercar, they have Turo, they have BMW ReachNow, they have, other...
Is there really a person who has all of those things on their phone?
Well, I mean, there's lots of different apps and solutions for different types of use cases. Certainly Turo, we see our primary use case for people using us for their weekend trips.
Sure.
And for longer trips. We don't actually provide any types of access by the hour or by the minute. And so we don't provide any solution for people who want to just get into a car now to drive for 15 miles and come back in less than an hour.
Right.
But if you want a car for the weekend, then we become a really helpful solution. So we're finding that those people who've downsized their car ownership have a variety of apps on their phone. Some of them are designed for ride sharing and ride hailing. Some of them are for short duration car sharing, and some of them for longer duration car sharing, like Turo.
Sure. Do any of you guys have anything to add?
So I think, Johana, it's interesting you talked about what are the trends, and obviously Maven as a startup within an OEM, and so as part of General Motors, it's interesting because I think a long time in my marketing career, we've been working on how we're going to attract millennials, biggest generation in history, and we know the whole notion of the American dream of the white picket fence and owning a house and a car does not resonate anymore. And so the sharing economy and all of these sharing brands and businesses that are emerging, enabled obviously by technology, I think is the really interesting thing beyond even just cars.
Right.
And if you think about assets that sit idle and the notion and the mindset that this new audience has, I mean, they have different values, beliefs, mindsets than previous generations. So I think if you look even sort of beyond just the trends of car ownership and you just look at the trends of millennials and the sharing economy and what's happening in lodging and clothing and jewelry and the fact that assets that sit idle don't necessarily resonate with this audience.
Right.
And so at Maven, we've spent sort of 2 years creating the demand side and proving out that, attracting over hundreds of thousands of members who are prepared to give you your driver's license and credit card and then use sharing for the right vehicle at the right time. And I think, to Andre's point about where they're focused, we're very much focused on personal use and then for the gig economy, because again, if you look at the workplace and this generation, they have a different mindset about work. And with some deep sort of segmentation studies and research that we're doing, we're seeing this sort of gig economy as being fueled by the sharing economy as well. And so I think that there are the bigger macro trends that indicate that 260 million cars in the US that on average do under 15,000 miles a year,
Right.
There's lots of capacity.
Sure. And so you're talking a lot about this idea of a platform or a suite of mobility options to replace car ownership. And so I think it's kind of interesting in the context of Uber right now, which has sort of wised up to that idea. Uber has partnered with GetAround, which is a car sharing company as well. They have, their suite of options, and then they've also had bikes and scooters. So they're getting into this sort of car sharing game a little bit, but the idea here is that they're this platform that consumers use on a daily basis. It's sticky, it's very regular. Google may enter that fray as well. Waze launched their own carpooling pilot. So, with the Googles and the Ubers of the world entering the fray, I mean, how do you guys navigate that? Do you think it's important to be on a platform, or do you think that you can be a standalone service that people will return to?
I think, Luke, go ahead.
Well, it's an excellent question, right? And I think one of the things that we learned 100 years ago, back in the early 2000s, I worked at both FlexCar and Zipcar, which were early in car sharing and fairly traditional, kind of station-based. And the reality is that the economics of car sharing are really, really challenging. Peer-to-peer car sharing economics are a whole lot better than buying cars and then sweating the asset and trying to earn those revenue streams. And what we learned, I think, through both of those companies and what we've begun to apply now with Silvercar is just the world tends to think about ownership versus non-ownership, right? Platforms versus independence. And I think that the better paradigm there is the vast number of use cases for cars. Like, essentially today, if you looked at your personal transportation wallet, you can divide it into rides and drives. In some cases, I just need a ride to get somewhere. In some cases, I need the dedicated use of a vehicle for a bunch of different things. And the convenience of having it parked outside and the convenience of having it available on demand when a rideshare platform can't service it that quickly is worth the economic trade-off. That's the decision we all make every day. And so essentially what we've been left with is a whole bunch of technology players, the Ubers of the world and Lyfts of the world and those folks, trying to get smart on assets, because managing assets is necessary. We don't do teleportation, right? So you got to have hunks of glass, rubber, and steel around to move you around. And you have companies that are manufacturing companies, asset guys, who are desperately trying to get smart on technology because, as Megan pointed out, every other consumer category has changed its business model, its consumer model in the last 10 years, except personal transportation. So there's this convergence point, really, where any one of you consumers out there in a $10 trillion global industry says, I need something that gets me the kind of transportation I want when I want it. And it's not going to be either or. It's not going to be I own a car or I share or fractionally use a car. It's going to be a little bit of both, right? And that's what really is going to change. The one thing that is clear, and your question was about, do you need to be on a platform?
Right.
Absolutely no question. The way this and every other consumer category gets distributed in the future is on a platform that's delivered on your phone, pay for what you want, and use what you need, and be done with it, not be saddled with the economic,
Sure.
tragedy of owning a car.
So when you say platform, I'm talking about a platform that exists today that has multiple solutions on it. When you say platform, what do you mean?
Well, I'm talking about a distribution platform
Okay.
primarily, but we think about mobility platforms as being composed of kind of three different things. You need assets. Somehow you got to get assets in there. You need technology, because that's how you're going to distribute it. And you need operations. These are physical assets. They move around. They don't, it's not streaming zero marginal cost Netflix videos. This
Right.
is, something that requires people, local, last mile, and that sort of thing. So it's really kind of a funny hybrid. It's not like pure technology, that kind of platform.
Right.
It's a different kind of platform.
Would you consider partnering with an Uber or a Google Maps or something like that?
Yeah, we do. So we work with car sharing companies at Silvercar. We have, we've built we have a technology platform, we have plenty of assets, and we
Right.
have a lot of people scattered around the country now. And, but it still doesn't serve every last use case. And that to me is what's interesting.
Sure.
Is
And
it-
Simon, did you want to jump in?
No, I fully agree with that. I think there's a mindset change required with the OEMs too. We were so focused on selling vehicles, right? And I think that currency has to change, because it's really about miles traveled and how much of that mobility wallet of consumers you can actually capture with your services, right? And I think these guys are exactly right. You have to offer multiple services on one platform in order to capture different shares of the use cases of we call them members at ReachNow. And what we started to do 2 years ago was leverage a fleet of assets, finite assets, 1,000 cars, and look at what different use cases we can basically add on top of that fleet, like car sharing, like ride hailing, like longer term rentals. Because actually managing that finite set of assets will be challenging and key when you think about autonomous, right? Because when I think we all believe about in ACES, the future of mobility, you have to be able to manage a fleet of assets, right? And this is what I think companies that actually do that today, they build up the skills and the knowledge and the technology in order to manage these assets efficiently for the future. Because at the end of the day, it's really about loyalty, right? How do you create loyalty in the mobility market? And let's be very honest, today, A to B trip, 10-minute trip downtown, there's not a lot of loyalty.
Right.
I mean, it's really about ETA and price at the end of the day. So the real challenge will become, how do I create an ecosystem of services, maybe with a subscription type of model, and all these things are going on in the market right now, that people actually come back to that one place, to that one platform. And that's why you need multiple services on one platform.
Sure. And so we have a number of different models on stage right now. I think Turo is probably the most unique out of the three, because you guys are all operating companies that rent out specific automakers' vehicles direct to consumer, direct, things like that. So I want to kind of break that down a little bit. I mean, do you expect in the future that you'll be able to, who is your customer today, and what do you think the customer will evolve to be in a world where personal car ownership goes away, maybe self-driving becomes, very pervasive, and ReachNow also has a ride-hail service. So what happens with that business model as well?
Well, ultimately, I think car sharing and ride-hailing will sort of blend, right, with autonomous. And right now, our customers are in the urban areas, right? The young people moving into town, working at Amazon and Microsoft, who are smart people. They're really used to making smart decisions. So they know that owning a car and parking a car and paying for a car that they only use 5% of the time is not a smart decision. So that's why they heavily rely on these on-demand services. And I think the more services we have in the city, and I'm really happy that Lime is moving into car sharing now too in Seattle.
Are you really happy?
I'm super happy about it. Because at the end of the day, it's about a mindset change, and people have to believe that these services are really, truly reliable, and the more offerings are out there, the better, because then people actually make that mindset shift. mindset shift. So I'm really happy about that. And ultimately, I mean, with the autonomous age, we'll see. I mean, operating an autonomous ride-hailing service in an urban area across, let's say, many cities, that's a challenge, and that's going to be hard. I mean, it's not going to be in the next 5 years. Let's be very honest.
Right, but to your point, if car sharing and ride sharing sort of blend, then you're competing whenever self-driving becomes pervasive with the ride-hail networks of today, the ones who have years and years of experience, operating a ride-hail service. How do you compete with them in that realm?
So from Maven's perspective, we're very focused on building this marketplace of supply and demand. So people who need mobility for personal use or for a job. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the gig economy, and yes, okay, rideshare drivers are one component of that, but if you look at the gig economy and the drivers that exist way beyond, if you look at the medical field, or if you look at, there are a whole lot of fields that isn't necessarily, they need drivers.
Right.
And so we've created a vision for this marketplace to attract these urban drivers who need to get around. Mm-hmm. So it could be other mobility types, potentially. Obviously, right now we're focused on GM's vehicles, but if there are assets that get you places for personal use or to do a job, that could definitely expand beyond cars.
Right.
And then on the supply side, if you think about assets that sit idle and the technologies needed that enables that seamlessly, then there could be also other supply side mobility choices added to the platform or the marketplace. And so we're very clear about that vision. And so in terms of partners, you've got to be really clear about then what is that marketplace you're trying to create and who are the partners that make sense. Or do you keep it sort of agnostic to different partners and want them to be part of that platform?
Right, because Maven is working with both Lyft and Uber at this point on your gig economy side.
Right.
And just to get into that a little bit, I mean, so you do have these two different services that you offer. I mean, which one are you seeing more demand for? Is your gig economy service, seeing more demand than your consumer service, or how is it shaking out right now?
So they're different use cases, and so on the personal use, it's by the hour, by the day. On the gig commercial side, it's more longer term. Mm-hmm. We think that sort of does all converge, and the flexibility for gig drivers as this gig economy gets traction and as there are more sort of non-rideshare gig opportunities, and they pop up every day in the delivery space, but even beyond that. And so our model is, eventually you would want the cars to converge as well, so that one car can be used for personal use or for gig use. Mm-hmm. And on the supply side, the owner would determine how that asset is going to be used. Yeah. And so it's all about asset utilization. And so as you're optimizing that to drive the revenue per mile, the revenue per hour, or whatever the business currency and the model is.
Sure, and then I think the thing that I'm trying to understand right now is, we're talking about ride-hail and car sharing converging at one point. I mean, so how does your business model evolve when that happens? How do you guys navigate the existing players in that field? I think the big thing, and you talked about this, you sort of have this valuable network of service centers and this experience managing assets, and that's something that this group of people, this group of companies has that Uber and other companies like it just do not right now. So that is sort of the advantage that you have, but you are also stepping into this logistics game that you've yet to really do, except, BMW just launched their own ride-hail service, but still, I mean, Uber and Lyft have been doing this for a while, and it's hard, and they lose a ton of money.
Right, and I think, the comments that we're making is all about, it's not just the technology in the app, it is the commercial backbone and the operations piece, and the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. We have a big sharing EV fleet with over 1,000, Chevrolet Bolts. So the infrastructure and the charging and what we're learning from all of that is critical to any sort of commercial operation. Mm-hmm. So sure, you can take away the driver, but the cars are still going to have issues with things happening to them and people leaving things in the car and like all of that. And so.
But that's one of the most challenging things about this, which is at the end of the day, we have a manufacturing automotive ecosystem that drives everything. We buy cars, we sweat the asset in shared usage in some way, and then we send it to a secondary market. Every single company does that, right? And so we rely on the selling of a car for individual consumption at the end of its useful life as a shared asset, and there's a real disconnect there, right? Manufacturing companies, discrete manufacturing companies that make cars, they make profits based on the number of cars they produce. Service companies earn money over time as that service is consumed, right? So until we can look at the entire supply chain, right, it's really difficult to see how we can take really good consumer use cases that are developed, and everybody here is in the process of building wonderful customer journeys and really way better ways for people to use cars that are more efficient and whatever else. But there's an economics aspect to this thing, which is going to be necessary for things to scale and actually make money. And I think that's really the point here it's more than just saying the best way for me to spread my transportation dollars around is in these 17 ways, and that's my transportation wallet. That has to be possible for a consumer, and on the supply side, you have to be able to use the three big things. You have to be able to use asset management holding cost, utilization, and contribution margin to make profits. And until that really happens, then we're just doing some interesting things.
Sure. And then I want to go back to Andre. I mean, so in this world of self-driving, or in this world where personal car ownership is not really pervasive anymore, I mean, what does a peer-to-peer marketplace look like?
I mean, our main hypothesis is that while car ownership is changing significantly, as I mentioned, with the downsizing of the younger audiences of their car ownership, we don't think it's going to go away completely. That's a central hypothesis for us. We think that for convenience reasons, for privacy reasons, for control reasons, people will want to continue to own cars. Certainly in suburban areas and less densely populated areas, car ownership will be
Sure.
alive and kicking. And there will be, I think, a difference in the types of cars that people want to own. I think and we see it with the announcements of GM yesterday, and with the challenges that kind of the cookie cutter type of vehicle is faced with today in terms of sales. I think people are much more interested now when they're splurging in a car to get a more personal car, to get a personalized vehicle. It's more of an SUV. It might be a truck. It might be something that's more representative of their personality or their family situation or their personal situation. And our key hypothesis is that Turo is going to be there to help people who own cars monetize their cars. And that's going to happen whether 100% of the population owns a car or 75% of the population owns a car. Last year, just to give you a sense, I mean, it's getting really big. Last year, the average host made around $650 sharing their car on Turo a month. So this has enabled a lot of our hosts to not just be able to pay for their existing car, but actually be able to upgrade to a nicer car.
Yeah.
And so in many ways, we're rekindling the love affair with the car. It's just that it's no longer the car that's the utility car that you just need to go from point A to point B.
Right.
Because for that kind of car, you might as well just use a network. You're right. You're not really attached to that driving experience when you're in traffic jams in LA for 30 minutes.
Sure.
But if you want to leave, your home and go out on a weekend trip, and you want to have a memorable experience, you might be much more interested in having a particularly unique car that will take you to that destination. So, our model wins with the changes in car ownership, and peer-to-peer, connection between the owner of the vehicle with the user of the vehicle. I think is here to stay.
Sure. And yeah, I mean, I want to go into that a little bit because, again, you guys are, a lot of you are sort of offering luxury offerings to consumers. And on the peer-to-peer end, you guys put out a study about the LA market, which is your biggest market at this point. And you said that a lot of people were seeking luxury vehicles, but people weren't actually booking luxury vehicles and I don't. You can tell me a little bit more about why you saw that. But there are a lot. I mean, Tesla is a great example of an automaker that envisions a network of personally owned vehicles shared to other consumers. But my question is, if I'm owning a luxury vehicle, I do not want another human being in it. So are you seeing that is that something that you think is plausible? Are you seeing that people are willing to rent out their luxury vehicles?
Yeah, this has been an incredible and somewhat unexpected development at Turo for the last few years. You know, when we started the company 8 years ago, we actually had a limit that we had at $25,000 back in 2011. You know, we wouldn't insure cars that were worth more than $25,000.
Right.
And we've been progressively ramping up that limit, and now it's $150K in the US, because we've seen a lot of demand for people who want to actually share their Teslas and their BMWs and their Mercedes and their Cadillacs and so forth, Audis. So just to give you a sense, the Tesla Model S is actually one of the top 3 most popular, most booked car on Turo this last 12 months. So Tesla, you know, is very, very popular. The BMW 3 Series is constantly in the top 5. Roughly, you know, a third of our cars are considered to be premium. And we do see, we recently announced a partnership with Porsche. We've probably got the most Porsches anywhere in any network on Turo. We've got thousands of Porsches, in particular in LA, actually. If you browse Turo in LA, you'll see a lot of Porsches. So people are sharing these cars, and there's a lot of demand for them. And we think it goes back to a couple of elements. One, you know, behind cars are magical. There are lots of enthusiasts that love these cars. And so we're, in many ways, enabling a lot of enthusiasts to connect thanks to this app. I was actually earlier today with a bunch of community members that are enthusiasts that we brought together here in LA, and we spent like the morning with them. And amazing to be able to connect through the app, you know, all these enthusiasts. That's one large driver of the rise of these premium cars on Turo. And then the other one is really the economics. You know, if you can own a BMW 3 Series for the price of a Toyota Corolla,
right? Why not?
Why not?
And so today, I mean, who would you guys consider your competitors? Are you competing with the traditional car rental company, or are you? I mean, I'm assuming you guys are a little bit in competition with each other. But also, I mean, and then in the next 10 or so years, how do you see that competition sort of evolving?
I see our competition really being on the guest side, competing with personal car ownership. You know, we want to make it as convenient as possible for people to be able to use Turo on the guest side. And we want to make it as easy as possible for people to earn money with their car if they decide to own a car.
But if you're so good at what you do, then what if all of your guests just stop using their cars and you don't have any people renting cars on your platform?
Well, because you don't make that decision just based on your, you know, on parts of your trips. You know, it's a holistic life decision.
Right.
And so convenience, we think, is, you know, we're very focused on making the service more convenient. Actually, just this morning, as I was mentioning to you, we announced the launch of a new feature called Turo Go, which enables the host, the owner of the car, to embed a piece of hardware in their vehicle that's relatively easy to install, that makes the car instantly accessible by their guests with the Turo app. So just making things easier, we think, is going to drive that adoption.
And then I want to hear from everyone.
For us, it's really not one competitor because we have so many different use cases, right? It's bike shares for those shorter trips. It's, of course, the ride-hailing companies. It's the Turos for our longer trips because we have BMWs on the platform that you can take for a week, right? It's literally looking use case by use case. But at the end of the day, I think for me the biggest challenge is how do we master the experience of all these different use cases in one application? Because if you look at the applications that are out there that have 20, 30 different services in one app, it's not a great experience, right? So we have to get to a point where we show the options that are really contextually relevant in a very personalized way. And I think whoever can master that will dominate the space moving forward. And
what Simon, sorry if I may, what Simon just said, I think is a great kind of closing on the previous question about platforms. Because I think he's absolutely right. You know, when you try to cram on a little screen on your phone, you know, a lot of different experiences with a lot of different formats and a lot of information, you know, it's really challenging for a sort of a platform idea to emerge in mobility. I mean, I think there's always going to be some aggregation that's going to happen, like we've seen in travel companies and travel aggregators. But, you know, it's hard to cram a lot of different unique mobility solutions in just one interface.
Absolutely.
Sure. And I think you wanted to.
So I think it's about better utilization and more convenient. So the more seamless and more convenient is to get the right vehicle at the right time at the right place. And we're very focused on this sort of the gig economy piece. So it's like, how do you then optimize the sort of the job and the vehicle? Because there's a whole lot of people who are looking for those gigs and looking to make money.
Right.
And so as we sort of really push into the future, it's like about marrying not only the driver with the vehicle, but bringing in the jobs piece as well.
Sure. And then
Yeah, and I think
last but not least, I think.
we just think about it. I think it's kind of telling there isn't a major rideshare company up here represented, and I think that
I mean, I didn't organize this, so I don't know why.
we're really looking at those guys, gaining steam and gaining momentum. I think that that's a fascinating thing, and really the solution, or the focus there for us is we just call it vehicles under management.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be about managing vehicles in
Sure.
myriad use cases across different geographies for lots and lots of different reasons, which requires different types of vehicles, but also different access models, as well as payment models, ownership structures. I mean, it's a big industry, right? It's almost $4 trillion if you count everything just in the United States every year. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to be an either or Silicon Valley, winner take all kind of thing. It's going to be, a collection of different solutions, and I think it's all about how many vehicles can you manage on your platform.
Sure. And so I think we're just about done with. It's about all the time that we have. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you guys had a good time.
Thank you.
Thank you.